I write so many songs about my wife, Annie, Goodbye Again, which I did last time here, and Leaving on a Jet Plane and stuff, and they leave me alone. I think they feel that they realize I'm pretty comfortable at home.
For decades, John Denver was celebrated as the voice of innocence, his music painting images of nature, love, and peace. But behind the golden-haired charm and chart-topping hits lay a far darker reality. Whispers of infidelity, addiction, and explosive fights haunted his private life, though few dared to believe them. Now, 20 years later, his ex-wife has stepped forward, finally breaking her silence and confirming the very rumors that fans dismissed as tabloid gossip. What really happened behind the closed doors of Denver's seemingly perfect marriage? Stay with us as we uncover the scandalous truth she finally revealed. When John Denver first married Annie Martell in 1967, the world saw it as the perfect love story. She was the muse behind his most famous song, Annie's Song, a ballad so pure it became a global anthem for romance. Fans believed their marriage was a reflection of Denver's image, wholesome, gentle, and deeply rooted in love. Together, they appeared inseparable, smiling for cameras, raising children, and building a life that looked flawless from the outside. But appearances can deceive. Annie now admits that from the very beginning, the pressure of fame cast a shadow over their union. Denver's career exploded in the 1970s, pulling him into the whirlwind of tours, interviews, and the temptations of celebrity life. While the world embraced him as America's beloved troubadour, Annie watched as the man she married slowly transformed into someone she could barely recognize. The public saw a devoted husband. Annie saw the cracks forming. She recalls moments when Denver's charm became a mask, his warmth on stage fading into cold detachment at home. The couple's picture-perfect life was riddled with growing arguments, mistrust, and emotional distance. And while Annie smiled for the cameras, she carried the heavy burden of knowing that their marriage was unraveling in private. The greatest irony was Annie's song itself. To fans, it was a love letter etched in musical history. But Annie confesses that hearing it often felt like a cruel reminder of what had already begun to fade. The song made people think everything was perfect, she reveals, when in reality, our love was already under strain. The fairy tale had cracks, and soon, the first whispers of scandal would make their way into the shadows of their marriage. Behind the glowing image of John Denver and Annie Martell's marriage, there were troubling signs long before the public caught on. Annie recalls that the pressures of Denver's rising fame were suffocating. Endless tours kept him away from home, and when he did return, he carried the exhaustion and ego of a man idolized by millions. Their quiet mountain home became less of a sanctuary and more of a battleground for resentment. Arguments, once rare, became constant. Denver's need for control clashed with Annie's desire for stability. She describes moments when his charm gave way to anger, his words sharp and cutting. What the world celebrated as his passion for life often spilled into obsessive behavior at home. He needed to be in control of everything, Annie explains, and when I pushed back, it always escalated. It wasn't just temper. Denver's obsession with his career began to eclipse his role as a husband and father. Family dinners went cold while he stayed holed up in his studio, chasing perfection in his music. Annie, meanwhile, felt increasingly isolated. To outsiders, she was living a dream. To herself, she was trapped in a marriage that demanded her silence. The strain worsened when Denver began experimenting with alcohol and the party culture of the music industry. Late nights, erratic behavior, and unpredictable moods turned their home into a place of tension. Annie confesses that she often felt she was living with two different men, the gentle songwriter fans adored, and the volatile partner who struggled with demons the public never saw. These cracks, though hidden, set the stage for the scandals that would later surface. What began as small fractures in their bond would soon explode into open fights, betrayal, and revelations that shattered the illusion of their perfect love story. As the tension in John Denver's marriage grew, the cracks became impossible to ignore. What Annie first described as heated arguments eventually escalated into explosive confrontations that left emotional scars no song could ever heal. Behind closed doors, the couple clashed with a ferocity that contrasted sharply with Denver's wholesome, peace-loving public image. Annie reveals that Denver's temper was unpredictable, sometimes triggered by the smallest disagreements. What began as raised voices quickly turned into shouting matches that shook the walls of their home. Friends and family occasionally overheard these eruptions, but rarely intervened, believing it wasn't their place. To the outside world, Denver was a gentle poet. To Annie, he could be domineering, angry, and at times frightening. One incident she recalls vividly involved a fight over finances and Denver's growing obsession with control. He wasn't just angry, she explains. He wanted to win every argument, no matter the cost. That need for dominance turned ordinary disagreements into wars of attrition, leaving both sides emotionally drained. Whispers of these fights did leak into Denver's inner circle. Close friends noticed Annie's forced smiles and Denver's quick temper, but they dismissed it as the natural tension of a high-profile marriage. After all, how could America's folk hero possibly be guilty of the very flaws his songs seemed to transcend? But the truth was darker. Annie admits that some fights grew so intense they crossed a line. Property was damaged, words were weaponized, and the emotional fallout lingered long after the shouting stopped. People saw him as a man of peace, she says softly, but peace was the last thing we had in that house. These explosive arguments not only eroded their marriage, but set the stage for even deeper betrayals. And soon, the rumors of infidelity would ignite a scandal that no amount of music could hide. For years, John Denver's wholesome image was untouchable. But Annie now confirms that beneath the surface lay a web of infidelities that fractured their marriage beyond repair. She recalls the first time she suspected his wandering eye, late-night calls, unexplained absences, and the way he charmed women backstage after concerts. At first, she dismissed it as part of the music industry's culture, but eventually, the whispers became impossible to ignore. Annie describes the humiliation of hearing rumors from friends rather than from her husband. Groupies followed Denver from city to city, and his growing appetite for attention extended beyond the stage. What devastated her most wasn't the physical betrayal, but the emotional distance that came with it. He didn't even try to hide it after a while, she confesses. I felt invisible, as though I was just there to maintain the image of a perfect family. Denver's infidelities weren't merely private scandals. They directly poisoned the foundation of their marriage. Each revelation deepened Annie's mistrust, creating an environment where love turned to suspicion. She recalls confronting him only to be met with denial, anger, or empty promises that things would change. The cycle repeated itself endlessly until the marriage was defined not by love, but by betrayal. Friends close to the couple recall Annie's growing sadness during this time. Though she rarely spoke of it, her eyes told the story, an exhaustion from constantly competing with strangers for her husband's loyalty. Denver, meanwhile, continued his public persona untouched, singing about love and devotion while privately breaking the vows that had once defined his music. By the time the truth became undeniable, Annie realized their bond had been permanently shattered. The trust was gone, the respect eroded, and the scandal of infidelity loomed large over their lives. For her, it was the final proof that the man celebrated for love songs lived a life riddled with contradictions. As John Denver's fame skyrocketed, so did the tensions inside his marriage. Annie reveals that money and control became a battlefield, with Denver's success transforming him into a man obsessed with power. On stage, he was the voice of humility, singing about the simple beauty of life. At home, he was consumed by the trappings of celebrity, lavish spending, high-profile investments, and the constant demand to be in charge. Annie describes how financial disagreements spiraled into relentless power struggles. Denver's touring income gave him dominance in the relationship, and he wielded it unapologetically. He wanted everything his way, she explains. From where we lived to how the money was spent, there was no room for compromise. What should have been a partnership became a one-sided dictatorship, with Annie feeling more like an accessory than an equal. The couple clashed over real estate, with Denver purchasing expensive properties that Annie neither wanted nor approved of. Their Aspen home, which fans saw as a mountain paradise, was often the backdrop for bitter disputes about ownership, spending, and priorities. Friends later revealed that Denver's controlling behavior extended even to Annie's personal finances, keeping her dependent while insisting he alone knew best. The pressure of fame amplified everything. Public appearances required Annie to smile through the cracks, hiding the truth of their domestic battles. The money that should have provided security instead became a weapon of division, exposing the imbalance of power between them. Annie admits she often felt trapped, bound not just by the marriage, but by the image of perfection the world demanded they maintain. Behind the scenes, these struggles left deep scars. What the world saw as a fairy tale romance was, in reality, a constant war over control, with Denver's fortune and fame becoming the very tools that dismantled the love they once shared. For years, John Denver projected the image of a clean-cut, all-American musician. Annie now admits that behind closed doors, he wrestled with demons that corroded their marriage. Alcohol, mood swings, and bouts of jealousy turned their once loving relationship into a toxic cycle of chaos and regret. Annie recalls nights when Denver's drinking pushed him into darker moods, transforming his usual charm into volatility. He wasn't the man people thought they knew, she explains. The alcohol brought out anger, suspicion, and a need to control everything around him. His jealousy became suffocating, with accusations and outbursts erupting over the smallest interactions, whether real or imagined. This darker side shocked Annie, who had once fallen in love with the gentle songwriter. As his addictions deepened, so did the emotional distance between them. Family and friends sometimes witnessed Denver's erratic behavior, but chose silence, unwilling to tarnish the image of a man so revered by millions. Annie, however, endured it daily, living with the unpredictable storms that could erupt without warning. Jealousy also seeped into his professional life. Denver's insecurities about his career often led to bitter comparisons with other musicians, and Annie bore the brunt of those frustrations. He questioned her loyalty, demanded constant reassurance, and punished her with silence or rage when she failed to meet his escalating expectations. To the public, Denver was a symbol of peace and purity, but Annie's testimony reveals a man torn apart by contradictions. His music spoke of harmony, yet his private life descended into disarray. For Annie, the addiction and jealousy became unbearable, turning their marriage into a prison from which she longed to escape. This revelation peels back yet another layer of the Denver myth, exposing the haunting truth that even the brightest stars can cast the darkest shadows. By the early 1980s, the marriage between John Denver and Annie Martell had reached its breaking point. What began as a fairy tale union had devolved into a cauldron of infidelity, fights, and emotional distance. For years, Annie endured the cracks behind their picture-perfect image, but eventually, she could no longer carry the burden. The decision to divorce was both inevitable and devastating, not just for them, but for the millions who idolized their relationship. The news stunned Hollywood. Denver wasn't just any celebrity. He was the golden boy of American folk music, a man whose songs symbolized love, peace, and family. The announcement of his divorce shattered that illusion. Fans were left grappling with the uncomfortable truth that even their idol couldn't escape the scandals that plagued ordinary marriages. Behind the headlines, however, the split was brutal. Annie recalls negotiations that felt more like battles than resolutions. Assets, property, and finances became weapons in a war of resentment. Denver's controlling tendencies didn't soften during the process. In fact, Annie claims they intensified. "He wanted to win, even as we were tearing each other apart," she reveals. The emotional toll was staggering. Annie describes the grief of walking away from a man she had once believed to be her soulmate. Denver, meanwhile, struggled with the loss of the family image that had been so central to his public persona. The divorce didn't just end their marriage, it left both of them scarred, carrying wounds that fame and fortune could not heal. To the outside world, the story was another Hollywood heartbreak. But for Annie, it was liberation, a painful, costly escape from a marriage that had long since stopped being a partnership. And though the divorce shocked fans, the darkest secrets of their union had yet to surface. John Denver's untimely death in 1997 only amplified the rumors and scandals that had shadowed his life. Annie Martell now reveals that many of the darkest aspects of their marriage remained hidden from the public, carefully buried behind the facade of his wholesome image. For decades, whispers of affairs, volatile arguments, and personal struggles were dismissed as tabloid fodder. But in reality, they were part of the private world that Annie endured silently. Annie claims that after Denver's death, she began receiving confessions and accounts from people who had witnessed the other side of his life. Former collaborators, friends, and even family members quietly disclosed behaviors that had never been reported. These included late-night encounters, hidden relationships, and moments of manipulation that contrasted sharply with his public persona. For fans, Denver remained the gentle troubadour. For Annie, these revelations confirmed a private truth she had lived for years. Even the financial and legal battles had layers of scandal previously unknown. Certain contracts, property arrangements, and business decisions suggested a man whose image of perfection masked considerable personal turmoil. Annie hints that Denver's public image had been meticulously curated, leaving the messy realities hidden from view. Yet the most shocking secrets were those tied to his intimate relationships. Annie describes patterns of behavior that suggest a man torn between fame, desire, and loyalty. These private scandals weren't widely discussed at the time, partly out of fear of defaming a beloved public figure, and partly because Annie herself needed time to process the emotional weight of what she had witnessed. Her decision to speak out now, 20 years later, is both courageous and revealing. By finally sharing the truth, Annie sheds light on the hidden layers of Denver's life, exposing the contradictions between the icon the world celebrated and the man she knew behind closed doors. For 20 years, Annie Martell remained silent about the darkest chapters of her marriage to John Denver, assuming she either forgave, forgot, or was protecting her own privacy. Now, she finally explains the complex web of reasons that kept her quiet for so long. A mix of grief, fear, and the weight of public expectation. Annie admits that in the immediate aftermath of their divorce, she needed distance. The emotional scars were raw, and speaking publicly about infidelity, abuse, or manipulative behavior would have reopened wounds she wasn't ready to confront. "I had to protect myself first," she says. The pain of reliving fights, betrayals, and the personal consequences of Denver's darker habits was too intense to share with the world. Beyond personal healing, Annie feared the backlash. Denver was not just a musician. He was an icon. Any negative revelations could have sparked outrage from fans who idolized him, or worse, painted her as the villain. In Hollywood and the music industry, the lines between truth and perception are fragile, and Annie understood that challenging the legend could have devastating consequences. There was also a sense of loyalty to her children. Publicly revealing intimate details could have impacted their lives, and she prioritized their well-being over sensational headlines. Annie spent years weighing the right time, the right approach, and the necessity of telling the full story rather than fragments filtered through rumor or gossip. Finally, the passage of time allowed her to gather perspective. Grief had lessened, wounds had healed enough to face the truth publicly, and the world had changed, becoming more receptive to complex, nuanced stories about beloved public figures. 20 years later, Annie felt strong enough to confront the past honestly, exposing the truths hidden behind John Denver's perfect image. After 2 decades of silence, Annie Martell's revelations are nothing short of explosive. In a candid account, she confirms the rumors that have swirled around John Denver for years, finally lifting the veil on the private turbulence behind his public persona. Infidelity, jealousy, addiction, and emotional manipulation, these were not mere whispers, but truths she endured firsthand, hidden beneath the polished image of a beloved music legend. Annie describes the moment she decided to speak out as a combination of courage and necessity. "People deserve to know the full story," she says. "It's easy to idolize someone, but no one is perfect. I lived the reality, and it's time it was heard." Her confessions paint a vivid picture of a marriage riddled with contradictions, a man who sang of love and peace while struggling with control, anger, and secret affairs. The most shocking revelations involve the lengths to which Denver went to preserve his public image. Annie details manipulative tactics, behind-the-scenes arrangements, and calculated deceptions designed to maintain the illusion of a perfect family and marriage. Yet despite these betrayals, she emphasizes that her intent is not to tarnish his legacy, but to reveal the complexity of his life. The public adored him for his music, but few understood the personal turmoil that shaped the man behind the songs. Perhaps the most striking element of her confession is the human element, how a life of fame, adoration, and relentless expectation can distort personal relationships, creating a chasm between public perception and private reality. Annie's account is both a cautionary tale and a window into the unseen struggles of those living in the shadows of celebrity. Her explosive confession finally reconciles rumor with reality, offering the world a complete narrative. John Denver, the icon, was not flawless, and the love story the public admired concealed a marriage fraught with pain, betrayal, and unspoken truths. Annie Martell's revelations finally exposed the hidden truths behind John Denver's legendary image: infidelity, control, and personal struggles that shaped their marriage. 20 years of silence have ended, giving fans a raw, unfiltered look at the man behind the music. Reflect, share, and subscribe to uncover more untold celebrity stories.